IT Insights, 5 questions to tech and business leaders.
Welcome to another episode of IT Insights series 5 questions. I'm Eva Banaś and my guest today is George Amanatiadis, VP of Sales and Customer Success at Scrive. I'm really excited to have you here today, George.
So am I. Happy to be here.
So, George, before we move on to the 5 questions, could you introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience?
Absolutely. So my name is George. I work for a Swedish eSign and eID company called Scrive. I've been in sales for the last 20 years. Started at telco, moved into event and education sales. I did some sales consulting as well for a while. And I've been with SAS and Scrive for the last 7.5 years. Dealing primarily with banks and financial institutions for when it comes to digital transformation and change management projects.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. So, let's start with a warm-up question. What would you be doing professionally if you weren't the VP of Sales and Customer Success at Scrive? What are the alternatives?
Yes, so it depends on what there were quite a few choices when I was younger. So one of the I see sales as a very creative process. So my alternative path initially was to go into art school. So because I very much like to build things and create things. For me, sales is a process of creating something out of nothing, which is in itself an art, and it's how I saw myself developing in a younger age. So I was an art school candidate when I was younger, essentially. So this is one of the things that I could have pursued. Another one is psychology, because that's the second element that I appreciate a lot in sales when it comes to the innate curiosity that I have of how people and relationships work in depth as such. So these are the two paths that I see. You asked for one, but it's still.
But I can see why you're doing sales basically, because you kind of combine those two elements that fascinate you, that you enjoy, and yeah, that's the best option actually.
Yes, and this is why I stayed with the same line of business for the last 20 years. It's because it's such a rewarding profession when it comes to interaction with people and projects and again building things together with people.
Couldn't agree more. So, what advice would you give to the younger you who was just at the beginning of his customer experience, customer onboarding journey?
The customer onboarding journey. So to focus on culture earlier would be my advice to my younger self. So there I have we're not only myself but Scrive as a company as well, and my team. We have a lot of focus on culture and change management instead of technology in the later years. So this is one thing that I would have chosen to advise myself early on when I went into customer onboarding and building customer experience projects. Because in the end of the day, it is the company culture of the organization that building any kind of flow or any kind of solution that translates through technology to the audience. It's a lot less about the tech than it is about what we want to convey and what we want people to experience. So yeah, that would be my advice, to get on that path a bit earlier.
But actually, this is quite a common scenario I hear. Like at the very beginning, the companies do focus on tech, do focus on the product, and only then realize what you've just mentioned. So, it's kind of like you followed the path over there.
Yes. No, but it's especially for SaaS, it's a very common path to go down. I see a lot of companies doing that. We were at the same event a few months ago in Denmark. So a lot of the discussions there had to do with the technology in itself and what it can enable. But at the end of the day, I think all software providers are essentially in the change management business. So we're moving from one way of doing things to another and the benefits that conveys. So talking about culture, talking about behavior, talking about leading change rather than features and specs is where we need to be, not only ourselves as salespeople, but the industry at large, I think.
And what is your biggest lesson learned in the area of customer experience, customer onboarding in the past few months? You mentioned culture, but perhaps there's still something more.
So culture is very important, but also making sure. So as a key component to these projects, what I learned quite early on working with organizations, larger organizations, both in banking and in other industries. I can mention as an example Nordnet here in the Nordics, so Scania, some of the larger projects, making sure that we have alignment internally, not just from the people that are leading the project, but all sides of the organization, especially considering how the customers themselves, so our customers, the end recipient of anything we build, experiences the process itself. So making sure that all of these projects have a lot of relevant input for different sides of the organization very early, with the spirit of collaboration, hearing a lot of opinions, and then agreeing on an approach. Again, this is where culture comes in, agreeing on a customer-centric approach to what we really want to achieve, besides implementing Scrive or whatever CRM, ERP, whatever system we might be looking at, creating alignment culturally and result-wise, or where we want the project to go. What is the end result besides the obvious topics when it comes to ROI and usage and adoption, as an example.
I couldn't agree more on that. Like, there's always a person, some group of people standing behind everything. So if you have to consider them in the process, no matter what.
Yes, and I think that in roles, especially sales roles, commercial roles of any kind, when we're taking on projects like that, it is very much our job to investigate and to figure out not only who would influence the project, but also use our experience from previous similar projects to see who might be involved or what input would we like to add, and make sure that we always ask. This is where psychology as an interest comes in. Always ask relevant questions to make sure that we unearth or we uncover all the data points that we would need to ensure a successful project.
Mm-hmm. And what are the challenges you're facing when working on solution architecture of various IT environments? How do you handle them?
So the main component, there are several ways, but the main component I would say is that to see the challenges with a view of understanding, with a view of really understanding what the problem is, because there is a lot of narrative, especially in sales. There is a lot of narrative when we're talking about objections, we're talking about roadblocks, we're talking about bumps in the road when it comes to these projects. But I think the biggest component into tackling these things is to really understand the industry you're in, really understand the customer or the group that you're working with, in order to understand where the challenge is coming from, and then already there showing to your project group that you really understand their challenges in depth. Already is a big step in creating alignment. And after alignment we can create trust, and trust is what essentially leads projects forward, from mutual trust from all parties involved when it comes to what it needs to be achieved, and especially what the challenges or problems are. For instance, I can bring a very clear example if we're talking about the industry that I'm mainly working on now, which is banking and financial services. So a lot of our industry, when it comes to SaaS, sees compliance as a challenge. A lot of companies see compliance as a challenge. We choose to see compliance as an enabler. So we choose to understand which framework we need to grow in, which framework we need to deliver in, and so deep understanding of how the rule set works across our market. We're mainly working in Europe, so we're working very closely to regulation and to regulatory bodies across the European Union. So understanding the challenge in depth and making your counterparts feel safe in the fact that they are understood and they're heard is already a big step in the right direction there, I would say.
Thank you for that example. Definitely interesting. And how can e-signing contribute to digital transformation of organizations? And actually, how to calculate ROI of such solutions? Because it is something close to your heart.
Of course. ROI specifically, and e-signing as a component is definitely a topic very close to my heart. So it's a two-part question. I will tackle the first bit to begin with. So e-signing as a component, as a component to digital transformation. So e-signing is primarily an enabler or a growing agent, if that's the right formulation. So it's an enabler in a larger data flow. So we see onboarding as effectivizing operations in general, of effectivizing the way that data flows from one point to another and enhancing customer experience. So what we aim to do by providing a secure and easy way for customers to sign from wherever they are, we're contributing into building a seamless experience for the end customer. So we see e-signing as a core component into a digital transformation concept. However, that the primary role is that it enables a lot of other flows to function and to come together. So from KYC and AML flows, so uncovering data and checking that the organization is compliant, that they follow all the rules and regulations they need to secure a safe and compliant onboarding, connecting that to documentation, then connecting the documentation to authentication, so proving the customer's identity, and then bundling all that data points together to our customers' back office or ERP systems to ensure a smooth flow of information is the primary role of the e-signing component. When it comes to ROI, there are quite a few ways to look at it. There is quite obvious wins when it comes to ROI. So it's saving on material costs. So postage, stamps, printing, envelopes, things like that. That is quite obvious. Then we can calculate working hours or average time to complete a process, which is also an obvious benefit. Where I think the biggest win on an ROI perspective has to do with how the experience translates to the customer. So how the customer experiences the organization and the thought process behind the flow that they're getting onboarded by, because we see a very clear link between the onboarding process and customer loyalty. So a customer that feels heard and understood and taken care of during their onboarding, they're a lot more likely to stay with that organization and have a positive view. So the NPS score, the Net Promoter Score, gets greatly impacted by onboarding. And then when we're looking at shorter term benefits, there is a big component that has to do with pure numbers when it comes to conversion. So converting a customer from when they're hitting the website and they're showing any kind of interest to converting that into an activated customer for a financial institution. This is where I think the most tangible and most short-term win in terms of return on investment comes, because we've seen up to 200% change in conversion rates from a previous online flow to implementing a digital process through Scrive, as an example. And it's a very substantial change that we can affect.
Very tangible one, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And just, I don't want to stress the solution in itself, but primarily building a flow that is customer friendly, that is pedagogical, and makes the customer feel met where they are, essentially.
Mm-hmm. George, it was really great to talk to you.
Likewise.
Thank you for sharing all the insights, all your experiences with us today. And also thank you, our audience, for listening to George's stories. And see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
IT Insights, 5 questions to tech and business leaders. Visit us at itinsights.tech and dive into our podcasts, webinars and events.